extraordinary people who have done extraordinary things. They've saved lives, accomplished the impossible, and effected change in our world. Here are the top 15 most heroic people to have ever lived. Number 15. Nancy Wake. Nancy Wake, who would later become known as the White Mouse, was a nurse and journalist from New Zealand who married a Frenchman and moved to live in France in the 1930s. She was in Marseille when the country fell under German control in 1940, and not one for sitting back and letting world events take place around her. She became a courier for the Pat O'Leary Escape Network and helped Allied troops escape from enemy territory into the safety of Spain. She remained undercover for 3 years, putting her life on the line countless times to help gather and transmit intelligence out of France. Said to be capable of killing a man with her bare hands and able to drink anyone under the table, it was only in 1943 that the Nazis became aware of what she and her husband were doing. And while they captured and executed him, Nancy Wake was able to get to Britain, where she joined the Special Operations Executive. In her new role, she parachuted into enemy territory as a part of a small team to help prepare resistance forces, and fought in several skirmishes to repel the German troops. It was people like her that truly helped to turn the tide of the war, and her selfless acts helped save the lives of thousands of people. She was awarded a number of medals for her bravery throughout her career and became a top target by German intelligence, who referred to her as the White Mouse. Number 14. John Robert Fox. It takes a true hero to sacrifice themselves in order to save their compatriots. And while there are countless stories of this happening during the Second World War, there's perhaps none as inspiring as the story of John Robert Fox. Born in Cincinnati, Ohio, he graduated from Wilberforce University with a degree in engineering and joined the U.S. Army as a second lieutenant in 1941. He became part of the 92nd Infantry Division, which was a segregated African-American division that became known as the Buffalo Soldiers, and worked as a forward observer of the 598th Artillery Battalion. The day after Christmas in 1944, he and a small team volunteered to stay behind in the Italian village of Somocolonia, which is in the Serchio River Valley, after American troops had been advised to withdraw because the region had been taken over by German troops. From the second floor of a building, Fox remained in communication with American artillery units to direct their fire against the enemy troops, and was forced to direct the shells closer and closer to his position as they progressed through the village. Finally, with very little chance of fending off the German onslaught, he directed the next strike on his exact location. The soldier who received this request at first hesitated, thinking it must have been a mistake, but Fox insisted and simply said, "Fire it." The sacrifice he made and the subsequent delay to the Germans' movements allowed American troops to arrange a counterattack to eventually retake the village, and they found Fox's body along with those of 8 Italian soldiers, surrounded by hundreds of German casualties. To this day, a memorial can be seen in the village in honor of his bravery that day, and during a ceremony in 1997, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor by then-President Bill Clinton. Number 13. Florence Nightingale. Born on May 12, 1820, Florence Nightingale found herself in a world where medical care was just only finding its feet, and in many ways still relied on medieval ideals. But she had different ideas and is generally regarded as being the founder of modern nursing. She took various posts at hospitals around London in the early part of her life, and after training a group of volunteers, she and 38 of them were sent to the Ottoman Empire to tend to Allied casualties of the Crimean War, in which injured soldiers were being treated in horrendous conditions. Medicine was in short supply, there weren't enough medical staff to take care of the wounded, and the military authorities were showing a lack of compassion to those under their care. So Nightingale took it upon herself to turn things around. In her first winter there, 10 times as many soldiers died from disease than died in the actual fighting, and it took a concentrated effort on her part to convince the British government to take things more seriously. It was her relentless campaigning along with her continual treatment of the soldiers that sharply reduced the number of deaths. She introduced, for example, the idea of regularly washing hands and various other improvements in hygiene, and it was only by putting herself on the front line and potentially exposing herself to deadly illness that she was able to prove that her methods worked. She became known as the Lady with the Lamp, following newspaper reports of her work, and thanks to her efforts, nursing was brought out of medieval times and became far more similar to how it is done today. Number 12. Bayard Rustin. When talking about the leading figures of the American civil rights movement in the 1960s, you'll immediately think of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and several others. But there was one man who was crucial in the development of the movement who, for personal reasons, was forced to retreat from the public eye and resort to influencing events from sidelines. Bayard Rustin helped to shore up support behind Martin Luther King, organized the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, was a co-director of the Crusade for Citizenship, and helped organize a support network to assist people from being evicted from their farms and other properties. Perhaps the biggest role he played, though, was in convincing Martin Luther King of the importance of nonviolent protest, something that ensured the movement couldn't be written off as an aggressive one and became an incredibly powerful means of protest. The problem Rustin faced, however, was that he was homosexual, and this unfortunately meant that the wider society was less likely to listen to his voice than those of others. Rather than taking his rightful place as a civil rights leader, it forced him to advise from behind the scenes until the world was willing to accept his sexuality. And in the 1980s, he was finally able to take a public role as an advocate for gay rights. Number 11. Stanislav Petrov. Very few can lay claim to having saved the world, but Stanislav Petrov was one of them, and it was only many years after the event that the truth came to light. The Cold War was a tense time for civilians across the planet, never quite knowing whether the two main superpowers would decide to make use of the massive nuclear arsenals at their disposal, which were powerful enough to destroy the planet several times over. We know of times like the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we're told that frictions between America and the USSR were at their most dangerous, and when we were just minutes away from a nuclear war, but there was one incident that saw the threat come even closer than that. On September 26, 1983, the Soviet Union early warning system detected the launch of 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles from bases in the U.S. Petrov's job was to monitor the reports from the warning system and to report anything of concern to his superiors. But on that day, he decided to hold back and wait for further confirmation. If he had made the call, Russian generals would have almost certainly launched a counterattack that would have changed life as we know it. But Petrov had a suspicion, and he was looking at a false reading. Of course, his instincts were proved to be right, when the American bases had not launched any missiles, and there had instead been a false reading on the early warning system that had been caused by a rare alignment of the sun on the horizon with high-altitude clouds. In the following years, Petrov was criticized by some for not performing his duties as he should have done, but praised by others for showing such level-headedness. But we should all be thankful that he did, and in the process, save the world from devastation. Number 10. Tank Man. On April 15, 1989, student-led protests began to take place across China following the death of a pro-reform member of the Communist Party, amid concerns about the direction of the party and the country. With calls for more democratic representation, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press, hunger strikes and other peaceful protests broke out in at least 400 different cities across the country. But it's what happened in Tiananmen Square in Beijing that made headlines around the world. At the peak of the unrest, more than 1 million people gathered in the square, and the Chinese authorities saw this as a threat to their very existence. Almost 300,000 troops were deployed to the capital city to maintain order, and on June the 4th, they killed protesters and bystanders as they made their advance. It was this that led to one of the bravest acts a person could ever do, because as tanks rolled along the street into Tiananmen Square, one protester, known simply as Tank Man, walked directly into their path. Holding 2 shopping bags, he gestured at the tanks with one of them, and they tried to drive around him. He continued to move in front of them until they turned off their engines, at which point he climbed on top to speak to the officers inside. Eventually, he was pulled aside by 2 police officers and the tanks continued. But it was a powerful moment of peaceful protest, one that was made even more remarkable by the fact that the man's identity was never determined for certain. Number 9. Neil Armstrong. Imagine strapping yourself into a vehicle that sat atop a huge explosive force that, if it works, will propel you out of the Earth's atmosphere on a voyage to a heavenly body that, at that moment in time, no one else had ever been to. That's exactly what Neil Armstrong and his crew faced in 1969 when they launched on July 16th, and the rest is now history. It was the culmination of a hugely expensive and complicated research and development program, which also served as a proxy battle against the Soviet Union to prove which superpower had won the space race. But those first moments that were broadcast to the world when Armstrong made his first steps on the moon brought all of humanity together in excitement and admiration for what had been made possible. He wasn't the only person on that mission, and there were countless incredible people involved in making it happen. But Neil Armstrong was the first man to set foot on the moon, and there's no denying the fact that what that act gave to the world instantly made him one of the greatest heroes of the 20th century. It's a feat that hasn't been seen ever since, but if current plans of a manned mission to Mars become a reality, we may see another Armstrong-like figure within our lifetimes. We're constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Katherine Johnson. In 2015, Barack Obama awarded Katherine Johnson the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And despite having been involved in one of the most impressive projects in American history that most U.S. citizens are incredibly proud of, very few people actually knew who she was. Born in 1918 in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, she immediately showed an affinity to math from a young age and began pursuing a career as a research mathematician after graduating. She had a remarkable ability to handle complex equations, and this led to her being given a prominent position at NASA. Without her, it's doubtful the space program could have developed as fast as it did, and it could have easily been another decade until Apollo 11 launched to the moon. With very little available in terms of computer power, it was down to people like Katherine Johnson to calculate trajectories, launch windows, and emergency return paths. She was one of the first African-American women to work in such a position at NASA, and even helped develop the use of computers to assist with the calculations. Her career at the space agency lasted for 35 years, and she was involved with missions ranging from that of Alan Shepard, who was the first American in space, to the beginning of the space shuttle program, and even planned a mission to Mars. Number 7. The Chernobyl Three. On April 26, 1986, the unthinkable happened in Ukraine. One of the 4 nuclear reactors at the Chernobyl power plant exploded, and in the process released more radioactive fallout than either of the 2 nuclear bombs dropped in the Second World War. Dozens of people were instantly killed. Countless more would be affected for the rest of their lives by the level of radiation that they were exposed to, and it raised questions about the safety of using nuclear power. But despite things eventually being brought back under control, it was the actions of 3 brave volunteers that prevented a full meltdown from occurring, which would have caused far more deadly and wide-ranging consequences that would have affected most of Europe. A couple of weeks after the main explosion, it was realized that the main reactor core, which was still melting down, was situated above a large pool of water. The core, which at the time was molten radioactive metal, was slowly moving towards the water, and if it had made contact, would have triggered a steam reaction that would have almost certainly destroyed the entire power facility, including the 3 other reactors. The water had to be drained, but the only access to the valves was in a flooded basement that was highly radioactive. Authorities somehow managed to find 3 volunteers, a soldier and 2 plant workers, who put on wetsuits and made the perilous journey to the valves to successfully drain the water. But by the time they had turned back, it was already too late for them. They were exposed to such high levels of radiation that they had all died within a matter of weeks. But they were safe in the knowledge that what they had done had saved the lives and long-term health of millions of people. Number 6. Roald Amundsen. Roald Amundsen was a Norwegian explorer who led the way in traversing the polar regions. He led the team that was the first to cross the Northwest Passage between 1903 and 1906, and was not only the head of the first group to have been confirmed to reach the South Pole in 1911, but was also the first to reach the North Pole in an airship in 1926. He had been fascinated with tales of Arctic regions from a young age, and couldn't wait to be able to visit them for himself. He was just 25 when he joined the Belgian Antarctic expedition in 1897, during which his ship became stuck in the sea ice, and the crew endured a cruel winter before they could return home again. While this may have put most people off returning again, this only spurred Amundsen on, so much so that he even resorted to misleading investors about his true intentions to secure a ship for himself to make his attempt at reaching the South Pole. It takes a mixture of courage and stupidity to succeed in such a quest, and Amundsen, from all accounts, wasn't short on either. As the first to reach the last unexplored regions on Earth, he secured his place in the history books. But it was very nearly a different story, as he only reached the South Pole a month ahead of a competing team. Number 5. James Harrison. When was the last time that you gave blood? And how many times in your life have you done it? Or have you ever done it at all? is often seen as a one-off activity or something people only do every few months. But for an Australian national called James Harrison, it became a weekly appointment, and for his troubles, he's believed to have saved more than 2 million lives. That's because Harrison has an extremely rare blood type that has a high level of persistent antibodies against a specific antigen that causes hemolytic diseases in infants. Soon after he began donating blood in 1954, medics realized the potential that there was, and it helped lead to the development of an immune globulin-based treatment for the condition that, at that time, accounted for a significant number of infant fatalities. The problem was that this treatment can't be produced artificially and needs new blood plasma supplies from a donor to continue being made. Harrison was more than happy to oblige, though, and in 2018 he made his final donation, which took his lifetime tally up to 1,163, more than earning him the title as the man with the golden arm and being recognized as a true hero of our age. Number 4. Nicolai Jurisic. Due to the nature of war, there are countless stories throughout history of someone who's gone above and beyond their expected duties in the face of almost certain death. But perhaps the most impressive of all is the tale of Nicolai Jurisic and events that would make him a Croatian legend. Born in 1490 in what is now Croatia, the first historical mention of him dates to 1522, when he had become an officer in the Croatian army who was deployed to defend forts against the approaching invasion from the Ottoman Empire that was led by Suleiman I. So the story goes, it was his ability during this onslaught that led him to becoming the supreme army commander in charge of defending the borders. And this is how, in 1532, he found himself defending the border town of Kozeg. He, with a group of no more than 800 soldiers without any cannon or many weapons at all, were all that stood between the advances of the Ottoman army, which at that moment had an estimated 140,000 soldiers as they made their advances towards Vienna. According to reports from the time, Jurisic and his men put up such a valiant fight that the Ottoman troops backed off and turned the other way. And while there are conflicting reports that suggest this could also be to do with the August rains moving in and making it almost impossible to move an army of that size across the land, in Croatian legend, Jurisic became a hero who repelled a force more than 140 times the size of his own. Number 3. Norman Borlaug. Many of us have been fortunate enough to grow up in countries where food has been easily accessible, but in many parts of the world, hunger and famine have always been part of life. With a rapidly increasing population, the demand for food has never been greater than it is today. But thankfully, as a result of work by a number of scientists, it's also now easier to grow crops than it ever has been before. At the forefront of this research was Norman Borlaug, an agronomist from the US. He was credited with leading in the initiatives that led to the Third Agricultural Revolution, which saw a combination of new technologies, along with the introduction of high-yield, disease-resistant crops, to change the face of production. It was thanks to his work that Mexico turned from being a net importer to becoming a net exporter of wheat by the early 1960s, and saw India and Pakistan more than double their output of grain. He helped to apply the same methods across Asia and Africa too, and had such an impact on food security around the world that he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and also won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. Number 2. Enheduanna. Believed to have lived in the 23rd century BC, Enheduanna was a high priestess of the goddess Inana and the moon god Nana, who lived in the Sumerian city-state of Ur. Thanks to records from the time and a large number of writings that have been attributed to her, she is the first poet and author in the whole of world history that we know the name of. We also know that she was a highly intelligent and articulate person who, as well as contributing immensely to Sumerian literature, also ascended the ranks of society to become the first woman to hold the title of En, or High Priestess, a position that she held onto for most of her life. Even after death, she was revered by the Sumerians and in many ways became regarded as a deity in her own right. Number 1. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was such a remarkable individual and a hero to so many that it's impossible to sum up all of his achievements in a short space of time. Born in South Africa in 1918, he would become a committed anti-apartheid campaigner and the country's first black president, as well as the first to be voted into office by a fully representative election. It was far from an easy journey to this position, however. He became involved in politics in 1943 and soon found himself at odds with the white-only government that soon after declared the system of apartheid that created racial segregation throughout the country, and gave all privileges to white people. At first, Mandela and the ANC party that he was a part of remained committed to peaceful protests, but members became increasingly infuriated by how ineffective it was proving to be. He would go on to lead the militant wing of the African National Congress, and after leading a sabotage campaign against the government, he was arrested in 1962 and sentenced to life in jail for conspiracy to overthrow the state. He was sent to various prisons, most notably Robben Island, and was held for 27 years before finally being released by President de Klerk in 1990. He and the president worked together to end the system of apartheid, and in the elections of 1994, Mandela led his ANC party to a resounding victory. For his selfless commitment to his cause, his resilience in the face of adversity, his wise and peaceful approach to every situation, and his achievements, Nelson Mandela surely has to be the greatest hero in living memory. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.